colleagues and listeners, here we are. We've got a great show for you today. In fact, it's the start of a series. And I say series because we're going to have 6 short bursts of information and exchange with somebody that I would imagine most people in the industry know if they've had anything to do with security. And the person I'm talking about is Matthew Vaughan, who's the Director of Aviation Security and Cyber. That's quite a title there, Matthew.
Yes, it is. It comes with a range of barbs and responsibilities. So yeah, look forward to getting into the detail.
Yeah, and we will indeed. So right, so basically, just for the viewers, I'm just gonna rattle through how we're addressing this. So we're gonna be having a follow up from the basic introduction that myself and Salem have already done, and then we're going to hit 5 subjects so that we keep it nice and crisp. So the first one is broad international overview covering safety and security considerations for logistics. The second one will then focus on cybersecurity and not if, but when the Internet of Safety Security things actually happens. And then we go from screened to secured, change or be changed, security as a commercial asset. We then hit episode 4, which is human factors in security and safety. And there's something that I call the 4 Fs, which I'm looking forward to having a chat with you on. The human firewall. And then the last episode will be supporting air cargo logistics, national visions. And then we'll do a roundup of them all. And perhaps we'll have high priorities that everybody needs to be aware of and to do, and what we need to be aware of, moving through 2022, coming out of one health pandemic and potentially experiencing a cyber pandemic. So if that's okay with you, we'll start on the very first one. So broad international overview, safety and security considerations for logistics. Now, Matthew, from my perspective, I'm looking now at the obvious things that are happening. And the reason that we're coupling safety and security, or security and safety, is because one without the other doesn't make sense, and one always has an impact on the other for obvious reasons. So what I'd like you to do, please, if you wouldn't mind, is just give us an overview of what you consider to be the primary issues that everybody now really needs to focus on, from screening to their own advanced intelligence, the old favorite, the lithium batteries, e-commerce, what can be done at origin, security of the life sciences, and also the influence on contracts, God forbid, if somebody does get into the systems. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. What was the question again? No, I'm kidding. That's a really, really heavy start. So look, I think the best way to sort of boil that down, what you've kind of spoken about there is the digital phenomena that's taking place, the ongoing emphasis around what you would call insider threats.
Yeah. And
then the actual commodity-based risk and opportunity that represents the supply chain. So more broadly speaking, as we just sort of crossed over that 20-year anniversary, which we did last September, the 20 years of counterterrorism versus an increasing baseline of security measures, we are now at a point where counterterrorism, whilst it is still a key focus specifically for aviation and of course the supply chains that touch aviation, we're now sort of pivoting towards this different kind of risks and threats. And as you said in the introduction, they're no longer dealt with or successfully managed in silo or in isolation, right? So you can't have a lithium battery risk, even though it inherently is not malicious or intentional in nature, but you can't have that kind of risk be managed in isolation to some of the security controls and measures that the supply chain has evolved in the last 20 years. So to answer your question directly, insider threat continues to be a challenge. The baseline has changed over the last 3 or 4 years. Background checks, recurrent training, recurrent awareness pieces that go with that, and that segues really nicely into the the ongoing cyber challenge, increasing digitalization for the supply chain, and then as we spoke about the sort of commodity risk, right? So everything from the last couple of years, life sciences has obviously been a pretty big part of the overall sort of air cargo supply chain, if you like.
Yeah.
And coupled with the emergence of lithium batteries in certain parts of the world, and the way that they are declared and not declared.
I agree.
So
I agree, and we'll come to that a little bit short. But you just touched on something that made me think. You spoke there about background checks. Okay. Now, if you look at the way the background checks have increased in what they look for and the times, and now some of the criteria is, I mean, it's almost too difficult to get hold of. Where you've now got known associates and known associate addresses and things like that. Well, you know what I'm saying? Especially as you get on a little bit in years like myself, I can hardly remember what I did last month, let alone things like that. But it takes too long, Matthew.
Yeah.
And then you've got your airport request, and you've got your company background check. They do a lot of the same things, but you can't do one without the other. And especially now, the threat we've got with personnel, they're not going to wait that long to get a job, Matthew.
That's correct. Yeah, they're all really good points. The ongoing challenge is to make sure that knowledge of somebody's past can be used as an indicator of future behavior, but it really is just based on risk assessment. It's not an absolute, right? You cannot take all of what is known of the past in total judgment for what you believe they represent and the functions that they can deliver going forward. So recently in Europe, they adjusted some of the background checking and used that kind of risk-based methodology that ensured that positions that are potentially closest to risk and vulnerability have higher checks versus management functions that I might, for example, might be a part of. So I think as long as governments continue to go down that path, the correct answer is by balance there are parts of the world that just don't have that political appetite at the moment, or that security appetite to look at it. And of course now with sort of this post or endemic civil aviation operations, seasonal revenue and seasonal operations are increasing, right? Airlines specifically are looking for more seasonal based opportunities, short-term operations. And you're spot on, you cannot wait 90 days for a background check to put staff into the supply chain or next to an aircraft for that matter.
Yeah, and on top of that, Matthew, another one is why have you got to do the same thing from one airport to another? Why aren't all the airports accepting a centralized set of criteria? Because then that opens up opportunities with personnel management, because what I'm saying. So take where I am now. I could, in theory, do some work at Gatwick. I could do some work at Heathrow, but only if the ID checks were confirmed, and then I could have the freedom of going to both airports.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's another profound challenge in the way that I guess you could say law enforcement hosted lists and information are integrated into a national system. In the example that you just highlighted, that needs to or is part of what could be a national security restricted area credentialing system, right? That enables staff to be able to move between different locations. I think what really needs to be emphasized is that it's and you mentioned it before, it's around the employers and the operators, right? And making sure that they are trusted entities to be able to issue credentials that get people into restricted areas and sensitive places, but based on the balance of risk and economic priority. So it's work that is ongoing. at the sort of universal level, the ICAO level, and of course it's up to governments to then take on those obligations and implement them in their own jurisdictions.
Yeah. Okay, right, got you there. So what I'm actually coming to is airports have got so much that they could influence and benefit from, including the way they instructed their community or their ecosystem to be future-proofed. So things like, there's already talk about, them directing what types of facilities have to be built in the future. So, energy efficient, more green, etc. So you got all those things, but equally, it could cover minimum requirements for security access, so it can track when anybody goes into a wrong area and stops it immediately, or the data sharing. So there's so much that could be done if people got together and fulfilled one of the main subject matters that IATA really pushes, which is this data sharing, big data and people having the confidence. And then when I talk to you and some of the other people I've been speaking to about cybersecurity stuff, it's like, do you know what I mean? It's like what happens in a leper colony. So why would you go in there and start partying when something's likely to happen? It's very difficult for people to get confidence or not to be afraid to go somewhere because of the protection levels.
You're right, and then you add privacy on top of that, which is kind of falls in between the middle of sort of the evolution of digital solutions and collection of data versus the sort of cyber interference, right? That we're seeing, right now across the world. So the short answer is that there are technologies and approaches that are available to ensure that you achieve biometrics, for example, in an airport environment that allows that seamless, identity-based type security across territories and jurisdictions within an airport environment, but also allows that data set to then be protected in a way, secured, hosted in a way that can be shared, but obviously do that with a high degree of protection or encryption associated with that. That of course costs money and significant amount of investment to do that. But those sort of industrial standards attached to that, they are there today. But it comes back to that risk and reward. How much are you willing to spend in order to achieve the sort of facilitated security that you need to continue basic airport operations?
Is there national or regional or even global, totals of what these types of threats or security issues have cost the companies or the industries or the sector? And obviously, a lot of that is more open. There's some that wouldn't be known because invariably some people will pay to get their information back quicker than it would take for them to recover it. But is there a general overview of what the costs are?
So I can say within civil aviation, we certainly have a grasp on the costs associated with measures and controls following some of these high impact type events, right? We all know what they are. So and of course there's cost estimates that look at what, for example, an aircraft accident, as tragic as that is, what does that cost economically to aviation, to that jurisdiction, and so on. But to your point around cyber specifically, and to the degree that is not necessarily only an aviation concern, and we'll obviously get into that in more detail in session 2. That's ongoing, right? That work,
exactly.
The big 4 auditing companies, KPMG, Pricewater, all these guys, they publish, ongoing annual sort of actuarian based information that shows you that the sort of the degree of cyber interference and the economic, second order consequences that take place from that. And of course, in cyber, as those listeners would understand, never before, in at least in a security realm, have we had to rely on cross-sector experience and learn from cross-sector experience to be able to implement what we need to do within sort of aviation logistics today.
Yeah. Okay, Matthew. So, so just getting back to some feet on ground sort of common sense issues. The one we spoke about, the multiple airports, or at least the speed of getting a background check. With regards to governments and authorities and stuff, are they open now to do something different so that we can accommodate this? Because otherwise, everybody talks about bringing people back into aviation and sectors that we've got to compete with and try and attract new employees or employees that we need. But the same people don't have a full insight into the procedures and the time that it takes to go through all of those, jump through those hoops, which it's an area that's got to be addressed quickly now.
The short answer is there are some ministers out there that are ready to hear these kind of proposals. We as an association are involved in getting some of those proposals across the line, but it is a small, open-minded set of governments today that are looking at that. And you mentioned it before, 4 or 5 minutes ago. It's around establishing that trust, and if you're struggling to get that trust within your own domestic environment, can you imagine the challenges internationally, which is what we see today? I recently had a travel experience, which, as a seasoned traveler that I am, left me just really concerned about, okay, aviation's doing a great job in reinforcing customers that we have in the system today, but what are we doing to bring those new customers, those once a year travelers, or and I can tell you, we've without naming locations and jurisdictions, we've got a long way to go, right? And it's things like empowering staff and applying risk management practices, dynamic risk management practices to getting staff airside, for example. That they're part of the overall sort of efforts that we're making with some of those governments.
Yeah, and we also need to align that with competence issues and some sort of universal clarity on the competence that's been acquired over a period of time. So that in itself almost becomes the background check.
Absolutely, yeah.
And people who hit a certain level, Matthew, they should be encouraged to multi-skill and upskill and be a bit more forward thinking as to how they can get involved in various different links in the chain. You don't have to stick to the job that you're employed to, broaden your horizons, make yourself more value, and get involved in upstream, downstream support of those, and have a different outlook on where that career might take you.
That couldn't be more true in the sort of cybersecurity realm today. There are not enough professionals, quite simply. So we have to rely on people within sort of the sectors that either have some IT competence or it's a degree of sort of literacy around programming and IT-based systems. But if we were to try to recruit the actual or resource the actual number of cyber experts you need today, you're not going to get that from the available resources out there. We're going to need to cross utilize, upskill in areas, and almost do that on surge capacity basis as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And something now that you've touched on, which I find amazing, and it's no fault of anybody's. Now, I remember back in the day when new systems were being introduced and new IT systems, and it was taking forever. And then you'd see these people coming in that you thought were magicians because of what they could do on these systems. And then they would recruit some of your colleagues who had an interest in IT, and then they became super users. And then they wouldn't talk to you anymore because they were talking a different language, which was half the magician's language. And then you started getting involved. And if anything, it broadened the barriers. It made it worse. Now we've progressed, and you've got people who've grown up in IT and they've grown up in their own systems and what they consider to be their own security, or the security of the products and the hardware and the software that they've purchased. And they think that's enough, Matthew.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in fact, that ignorance level, or that level of self-protection of your own efforts and pride, is one of the biggest threats of moving forward and getting better controls.
Yeah, complacency, I think, is a word or an adjective that you can use there. The cyber challenge is everyone's challenge, right? It's not just as an organization or an employee, as an individual, right? And really simple things like, you know, you've heard it all before, but basic things like password management across multiple systems. There's a really funny UK comedian that was, you know, in the early days of passwords, where you had to add a character and then a special character and a number and things like that. You know, he almost guessed the entire audience, the structure of the password of everyone that was in his audience watching, because we all did that, right? We all just capitalized the first letter, and number one was our first number, right? You know, so it's there are basic things that we can be doing in terms of our own cyber culture, right? Our own protection, that you know can mitigate some of this risk, right? So but the long or the short of it is that it's not going anywhere anytime soon. It is largely an unregulated space. Criminal prosecutions are rare, and economic incentivification for these actors to want to do this and carry out these kind of events is extraordinary.
No, totally agree. And just to finish, because we're coming up to the end of the first session, something that, and just a very, very quick question to you: e-commerce, lithium batteries, right? Another level of ignorance, because at the front end, the customers, if it's a private shipment, they don't know what they're sending, they don't know what the restrictions are. E-commerce, huge pressure on carriers and handling companies to try and see as much as possible, but also the commercial pressure, because it's a huge cash cow. So what can be done, linking the security and the safety element, or the security and safety partnership, what can be done to make more people aware at the front end, so that as we get down to the most difficult end, which is actually loading that on the aircraft, we've got a much safer environment?
So I can mention it directly from a security controls point of view, because that's the real sort of main thrust of our work this year. And we've got a traffic conference resolution going through around the consignment security declaration. So when you're talking about dangerous goods, you know, class 1, class 7 type shippers that are within, you know, the regulated thresholds of lithium, majority are following the rules, right? So the challenge we've got at the moment is forwarders in some jurisdictions are either being recognized as, you know, competent security entities that are able to then, you know, authorize that particular shipment with a CSD, or just a security status, right? Let's not worry about the terminology for the moment. And then when it gets through the system as a trusted commodity, we're not leveraging the data points that are available to either apply certain rules on whether that shipment is, you know, subject to what you call high risk type security measures, where you would go down screening and, you know, essentially slow down the supply chain. But then we're also not getting the reporting and the universal reporting once the shipment, you know, has successfully flown and traveled and landed in its destination. That kind of information is not coming through either. So the real challenge, or the way to answer that appropriately is we've got to start looking at making use of that security declaration, both in digital and paper-based format, and then leverage the industry reporting tools when these you know, occurrences happen, and you've got breaches in the sort of dangerous goods handling regulations, which which I'm not an expert on at all,
Yeah.
but are complicated, right?
Yeah. No. No.
They're quite
And that's,
complicated.
yeah. And this is one of the problems, Matthew. But I think whilst all that's going through, and policies and simplicity and clarity and all those lovely efforts that have to be made, the reward and repercussion balance is one. So unless the repercussions are really high and the reward at the moment is high for certain people to do things, unless that gets balanced or it balances in the right way, it's going to be very, very hard to do something about it. And then you've got the worst probably end, which is ignorance and impact.
Yep.
And if something's not done there, to make people aware of what could be the impact of their ignorance and put some effort in that, because again, the commercial pressure is making people put one hand over their eye, and that can't be allowed to continue.
Yeah, you're spot on. We worked for an organization in our past that actually, you and I, we used to sort of jockey around, shipments and how we prioritize certain types of commodities and the way we get them through the supply chain. And I think again, when I look to my opening ambit around sort of where counterterrorism has come to where we are today, there are opportunities to make some really good risk-based judgments about what, to your point, revenue versus repercussion. There are really good tools out there, digitally based, by the way, that allow you to get that through. I personally thought we learned more out of UPS in Dubai, September 2010. But it appears we haven't. Right. So the context at that time was a little different in 2010. It was a month before the Yemen bomb plot, the cartridge plot. The investigating authority at that time was also not entirely clear, but ultimately did come out and declare that as a lithium-based event. And here we are 12 years later, still talking about this particular challenge.
And that's the problem. 12 years later, Matthew. That's a good now end to the first session. I look forward to chatting with you now on the second session and getting more into cybersecurity. So thanks again, really appreciate it. And let's roll on to the second session.
Sounds good.